this industry.
This is our project, and we are Chris.
Callum.
And Joe.
My dissertation was focused on understanding whether VR can handle effective social interactions, effective being the correct amount of dopamine gained from the conversation so as to not to lead to mental health issues. I argued that as VR is an object-oriented medium, effective social interactions can happen within them if there is no subjectivity created between the virtual and physical realms.
This dissertation addressed the use of virtual reality technology in an architectural graduate environment within the Liverpool School of Architecture. It also reviewed the responses from tutors on their views of integrating VR as a possible teaching method in the future, and also examined the past and present applications of VR and its future development.
Through my dissertation, I looked at the different mechanics and spatial devices used in video games to create engaging experiences for players. Loneliness is an issue that has been prevalent through society, but has been exaggerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to create an architecture that prevents, tackles, and educates people on the dangers and necessity, but also the benefits of loneliness. We believe that virtual reality will be intrinsic in helping people to break out from loneliness in any future pandemics or to cope with any anxieties one may have. Isolating snow, 5.5 warming friends together apart.
Initially, we started by breaking down loneliness into its constituent factors: isolation, solitude, and loneliness. Isolation is the removal of oneself from others. Isolation can lead to both loneliness and solitude and have positive and negative effects, but is not the sole cause of either.
Solitude is created through isolation. This can lead to greater creativity, reduced stress, but may also lead to depression and anxiety in prolonged amounts, which may lead to loneliness. A balance is required.
Loneliness is a social pain which can be as harmful to the body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, as it can cause depression, anxiety, sleep problems, and stress. While it is a subjective experience, it is caused through two strands: social and emotional loneliness. Social loneliness is not feeling part of a wider group dynamic, meaning you can be lonely within a group. Emotional loneliness is not receiving affection or attention from close friends and family.
Following this, we wanted to investigate spaces of each of these terms. Each of these spaces are subjective, as are the terms. However, we wanted to investigate the relationship of the space to these terms.
Spaces of isolation. The bar. This space can have varying degrees of isolation depending on how the user interacts with the space.
While the seats are laid out in a way that would create a group dynamic for some, people can co-opt this space through technology and positioning to create their own space of isolation. Looking out of the window and existing with the headphones removes the possibility of interacting with others.
Spaces of loneliness. Loneliness in prison is caused by isolation and a lack of freedom to remove oneself from it. This has shown us that the lack of freedom will be important to tackle when designing our proposition.
Spaces of solitude. Monasteries create solitude through individual cells, but the cloister means that there is a meeting space to be part of a group dynamic and prevent loneliness. Consequently, we noted the spaces of solitude were important as they can counteract the detrimental effects of loneliness, and so we decided to analyse more to understand them better.
The Ajanta cave-based monasteries demonstrate that the cloister method has been used throughout history and across religions and geographies.
The examples of monasteries we looked at are all geographically isolated. This was done on purpose so the monks could achieve solitude away from everyday life. Vala Monastery in Meteora is an example of a geographically isolated monastery. The circulation of Meteora revolves around a central courtyard. La Tourette is an abstraction of the standard cloister method of inverting this cloister and creating smaller garden spaces between the circulation. However, like the historic precedents, all the spaces of La Tourette feed into this central cloister to create an activated space.
Christian monasteries evolved to become an independent, self-sustaining community through a series of buildings ranging from places of worship to an infirmary and gardens to grow food. John Pawson likens the monastery of Novi Devur to being a self-sufficient city. The different functional buildings were all linked by the central courtyard of garden called a garth, which was surrounded by a circulation space known as a cloister.
This is a comparison of the different cloisters within the monasteries we have investigated.
The shape of a cloister can vary, however, the purpose of the cloister remains the same, to create an active space within the monastery. Heliotropic studies, buildings related to the sun's path.
While investigating Spaces of Solitude, we found Rodin Crater by James Turrell. This art project highlights light's relationship to space and us through creating a chamber that is only illuminated and comes to life when the sun is precisely in the right position. Turrell names light as an elixir that we consume and affects our perception. He uses light to create Ganzfeld effects that create virtual realities through your mind trying to create shapes out of the void of color that you perceive. This would be a good way to introduce those not used to wearing a headset into virtual reality.
Light itself has a healing property to it, with the natural light providing vitamin D, but also the colour of light having different psychological and perceptual effects. We've created a VR space which will be distributing to understand these effects better, to choose the right colours for our lighting.
Our proposal.
The word monastery comes from the word monos, which in Greek means alone. As we wanted to create an architecture that is derived from connection, it only seems right to name our project the Syndestry, which is Greek for connection.
We used the Liverpool Architecture Society's new normal competition to test our ideas. We proposed a pavilion where people could interact across the virtual and physical reality through projecting virtual people onto water spray in the physical world and live streaming physical people into the virtual one. This would help to highlight that we can communicate effectively even when we are apart from one another using different realities.
Having investigated sites across the world such as Seoul, Stockholm, New York City, and Liverpool, we noted that loneliness is a problem that persists wherever you are. As such, we wanted to create a rule set that would persist even if the architecture would change per city, much like a Maggie Centre, but for tackling loneliness.
Our site. Consequently, we wanted to tackle the problem here in Liverpool as a foundation. The site we have chosen, the corner of James Street and the Strand, sits in the central ward of Liverpool. As can be seen, there is a large mix of programmes with the buildings surrounding, with a high amount of foot traffic and residential buildings. The ward itself has double the average amount of people living within it compared to the others within Liverpool. Its approximation to James Street Station also gives access to all the residents of Merseyside. This means a total of 1.5 million people are in reach of the Syndestry. Liverpool has a higher amount of 19 to 24-year-olds than average, an age group who report to be more lonely in the UK than older generations. It has 15.1% more single people than England and Wales on average, and 15.2% more people living on their own, accounting for 50% of Liverpool's population.
The programme.
Using the work of a previous architecture student, we were able to see how to distill the monastery down to its original components and translate it into a vertical configuration. Using this, we interchained our program into this form to create our own vertical programmatic section that we could work to create our initial ideas from.
Initial form.
This initial form is created to bring the building away from the offices behind that would allow them to have a right to light, while allowing for maximum space on the ground floors. As the town moves up, it twists to anchor itself to the path of the sun, while also mimicking the context of the Church of Our Lady and St. Nicholas, which is the only other building on the Strand to lie off the grid. This anchors this industry as a focal point on the road and creates a link back to the roots in religious monasteries that the building is derived from. We are currently focusing on timber and mass timber as a construction method, as timber is known to have a more calming and relaxing effect on the minds of people when compared to other materials. We want to incorporate a central circulation cloister that fosters interaction and spirals up the building. As such, we've been investigating the metabolists and the work of John Portman.
The VR outposts. We want to create outposts of the Syndestry. These will facilitate different activities, but namely will allow for VR to be used to help those with loneliness who are struggling also with social anxiety. These will act as virtual entries into the virtual Syndestry to allow the user to access all the amenities of the building, even if they wouldn't feel comfortable doing so in person.
This is just a conceptual abstract massing diagram, just displaying how we see the building possibly being utilized. So we have this central circulation with these pods on the outside. So the circulation becomes the cloister equivalent of the monasteries here. While at the bottom we have this open double height mezzanine space that opens and activates the pedestrian footfall along the strand and on that corner. We're currently also experimenting with this idea of using parametric modeling and also using parametric features across the building as well. Here, this is just an example of what could be used for the entrance space. So the original shoreline used to be along the strand for Liverpool. So here, we're just reflecting that in the actual form of the mezzanine. So it's just reflecting the waves that used to crash along the edge. And it also reflects the fluid movement of the virtual and digital realm.
We were looking at the idea of using cells like in the monastery for different purposes, either having cells for group meetings or counseling, as well as cells for VR. Through massing these spaces roughly with cardboard, we enjoyed the way light passed through the layers of cardboard. We wanted to explore this further through the facade of how light could project the virtual within the spaces of the building through the building's facade.
These spaces were intended to help those struggling with loneliness through light and solitude. They give an understanding to the person using the spaces of the importance of light to their being and wellness. These spaces are split up into three ideas: no light, coloured light, and natural light. In the no light space, meditation pods are sat in a room with only a thin aperture of light coming through. This gives the darkness needed to help supplement meditation, which will help relieve anxiety, stress, and depression, three side effects of loneliness. However, when the sun aligns with the room at the solstice, it hits one of the pods which are mirrored and illuminate the room to reveal the space's true nature. This would allow the building to act as the opposite of the lantern spire of the Church of Our Lady and St. Nicholas, as the light would be viewed from within the building, not outside. We began testing this idea through cardboard models and reflected cylinders to demonstrate how effective the change in light would be. The next space is focused on the Ganzfeld effect and the effect of coloured light on the body and mind. The pods in the middle of the room can be used by people to help them psychologically. For instance, purple light is known to reduce anxiety, while orange is able to boost creativity. Therefore, users can use these pods for whatever they need, whether that be to relax or to help finish a painting. The light that exudes from these spaces fills the room, creating a Ganzfeld effect when perceived on the wall. This Ganzfeld effect will help to introduce those who have not used virtual reality headsets to the concepts of them, as well as highlight how light can affect your psychology and perception. Lastly, and only in sketch form, is the natural light area, which will have a relation to the sun, sky, and the positive effects they can have on the body and mind.
We aim to use VR, virtual reality technology, in multiple ways in the building. So these could be examples of integrating therapy sessions using VR headsets with people who have a high level of anxiety, who don't necessarily want to be in society just yet, and also using VR headsets to integrate social events in the virtual reality and in the physical reality as well.
For initial investment, we'll be looking perhaps at Facebook. As seen with Google, they've started to invest in architecture through Sidewalk Labs in Toronto. Facebook owns Oculus, which is one of the main virtual reality headset manufacturers, and as such, this would be a good project for them to invest in, as it would give them a platform to display what virtual reality can do for users. Past this initial investment, we could take advantage of the virtual nature of our building and create a non-fungible token or NFT from the virtual object. This would allow us to put it into a system such as Decentraland, or sell the object on and create royalties through either of these options. Within the virtual space itself, there would be licensed to be able to charge for certain events, or also create revenue systems through customization of users' preferences.